Robin Walsh. I'm Robin Walsh, so Head of Residential Services at Bournemouth University, but also QBO Board Member for Housing Codes and Standards. So I'll be mediating the session today. I've got a few slides which I'm going to share. Let's go to share screen. So I'm very used to Teams, and I'm now, here we go. So I'm going to run through these slides just to just kind of set the scene and to explain sort of where this has come from. So it was mainly driven this roundtable from on the back of the NUS Unipol accommodation cost survey that came out a few weeks, maybe a month or so ago now, and no, before Christmas, wasn't it? Actually, yeah, blimey, time flies. So hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at that. So some of this data that I'm going to present to you on these slides now might be familiar, but I thought I'd sort of hone in on some of the specific stats that came out of that report that got us thinking here at QBO that this was something that we wanted to sort of pull our members together and have a discussion around, and to, as Sarah said, to share some best practice and to see where we could take the conversation around developing a potential strategy or some guidance for members around this particular topic. So, so hopefully that's sort of what you're interested in today, and that's why you're here. So, as I said, so the purpose of today, so looking at the information coming out of the accommodation cost survey, 53% of universities reported affordability as the biggest challenge to the sector over the next sort of few years. And 34% of universities reported having affordability strategies. So I don't know if any of you here today are one of that 34%, or whether you're the other proportion who are interested in what affordability strategies are. Hopefully we've got a mix of both. So a bit more sort of scene setting. So again, data taken from the accommodation cost survey. The average annual rent for university-owned beds this year, 21-22, £6,227. University-owned beds with the inclusion of their private provider nomination beds, which I thought was a really interesting statistic for this. It was a new statistic for the cost survey this year. Because that's a model. It's certainly a model that we run here in Bournemouth, and it might well be a model that you've got, where you've got some of your own beds and then a proportion of noms beds or leases. So once you include the private providers noms beds, the average rent goes up to £7,059, and then private sector obviously tops out at £7,374 with an overall average £6,707 per annum. So that's where your average student, that's how much they're going to be shelling out on just their accommodation. So when you start to then look at that in the context of how much money students have in their pockets, obviously the main source of funding comes from the student maintenance loan. So this year, the maximum student loan outside of London was £9,488. But it's quite misleading, actually, and that was pointed out in the accommodation cost survey, that there's only a small minority of students that get that maximum amount of money. When you look, so in order to get that, household income needs to be under £25,000 per year. But when you look at the national average household income of £29,000 per year, which is obviously over that, the student with the national average of household income would only receive £8,823. So the majority of the students are not getting the maximum loan amount. So based on that context, overall average rent that the student's paying out is 76% of their loan. That's of the 8,823. So it's a considerable amount of money. And then so if you look at then how much that leaves a student with, you're looking at £2,116. Over a 40-week term, that leaves them with £52.90p per week to live on for everything else. So, that really puts it into context. And I remember being a student myself, and I did live very frugally, but £52.90 per week seems to be, you have to be very frugal to get by on that, I think. Another point to make is that modelling doesn't take into account students obviously living in London, have a higher cost of living, international students who are all very, very varied in the amount of funding that they have access to, postgraduate students, students from a cared for situation, students with families or dependents, and also students with siblings, with families where they've got siblings at university at the same time. And I'm sure there are many other variants. So that, the point is, there isn't, that average student I've just said has got £52.90 per 90p per week. There isn't any such thing as that student, actually. They're all different. So that's kind of the context that we're working within. When we look at affordability strategies, so as I noted, 34% of universities have reported having affordability strategies. That goes down to 13% of private PBSA providers. The only sort of well-known and advertised and utilised affordability strategy out there, the one that's certainly used in the London plan, is the NUS affordability strategy, and it's worth sort of just looking at that very quickly. So you probably know this NUS affordability strategy came out a few years ago. They say that 25% or 35% in London of all bed spaces in a building should be offered at 50% of the maximum amount of the student finance of the maintenance loan. That equates to, when you're looking at that, when you sort of break that down, that means that you need to have an annual rent of £3,353.50. Again, when you look at this next graph, which comes from the accommodation cost survey of the rental brackets across the different portfolios, you've got the private direct let market. At the top, you've got the university using private accommodation, which is that sort of blended model, and then you've got university owned. So the price bracket, that 3,353, you're looking at the orange, which is less than 5% of the portfolios that were represented in the accommodation cost survey. The NUS say it should be 25%. So it's just not realistic. We're nowhere near that, and I can't see that rebalancing anytime soon. So looking forward then, affordability strategies, possible benefits of having an affordability strategy. I've kind of listed a few here. You might have some other ideas. This is just to kind of get us thinking before we hear from Kirsty and Martin. It's something that, if you've got an affordability strategy, it enables you to focus on the local conditions, on the local market, what's happening, your accommodation market and the conditions of the market, the costs, the prices, affordability in Hull are going to be very different to what they are in London. So it really does. I think that what we want to be doing is to looking at affordability strategies that make sense for the portfolios that you're overseeing. It will help you to inform your own rent setting for when you've got your owned beds. It will also help you when you're looking at doing open market rent comparisons. You might have those perhaps as part of your, if you've got nomination or lease agreements in place, you might have those clauses that every period of time that you have an open market rent. It potentially will help you to influence private sector rents. That could be, when you're working with your accommodation partners, maybe renewing nominations, maybe when you've got new private providers coming into the market who approach you to talk about, do you want to take beds, or what's your sort of perception of them coming into the market? Do they need the beds? You can use your affordability strategy to inform those conversations. You can use them to, if you're talking to your local council about housing need for students, and also as well, it can also help to guide the information that you provide to students around them budgeting their student living costs. So what's affordable for them? Again, going back to all those different variants that I mentioned in previous slide. There could be others. They were just ones that I literally just sort of pulled out of my own head whilst I was preparing these slides. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to pass over to Kirsty and Martin, because I'm really, really interested. Kirsty mentioned, she gave me a couple of headlines we were having a chat a couple of weeks ago, and I'd said that sounds very interesting, Kirsty, and I think it'd be great to hear more about that. So I'm going to hand over to them now to tell us a bit more about what they're doing at Leicester.
Hi everyone. I think Martin is going to share his screen with us. That's right, we did have a little conversation at board to say, you know, what is affordability? How do we define affordability? And I did say, well, actually, we've had a bit of a stab at that. So this is really what we've done, and to kind of give you an idea of the sorts of things that we considered. In terms of our accommodation profile, it's probably worth us just kind of giving you a little bit of an overview of what we've got, because I think that's kind of within the context of our affordability strategy, that's really quite key. So we've got a mixture of our own and partnered and nominated stock, but the majority of our bed stock is actually owned. Our bed stock is really, really diverse. So we've got some converted Edwardian houses, some purpose-built stuff. Some of those Edwardian houses are almost palatial in their size with some of the rooms, so lending themselves quite nicely to a number of twin rooms. And then we've got kind of like small gatehouses that are just for 4 people. So it's a real mismatch of stock that we've got. We do work on the whole kind of mantra that we're not just a room. So like a lot of you on the call today, we're adding in, including all of the costs within our accommodations. There's no kind of hidden extras within there. And we're also kind of offering a great award-winning even Res Life program within our accommodation. And then in terms of what we do, in terms of our investments, all of our investments are really aligned to our kind of rent demands. So the way that we actually look at investment within the property, you know, we're thinking of the return on the investment that we're going to get within that, but we're looking at it kind of alongside what facilities have we got, what price points do we need to fulfill. And that's kind of the affordability strategy links through into that as well. Martin, I'll let you talk about our rooms.
Yeah. So just apologies for my voice, I'm fighting something, but just on some of the wider area around the profile. So we really do have a mix of accommodation, like Kirsty's mentioned, and we've tried to use that to our advantage, particularly where we've got our owned accommodation. And we can better manage the type of facilities that we're providing to reflect that broad range, that kind of ladder of rent, which we'll talk about in a second. I just want to give you some examples here. We do actually have accommodation starting in twin rooms at £65 a week, but we've got some single with wash basin starting at £70 a week. I've shown here our Lasden accommodation at £75 a week, and it's interesting looking at that figure that Robin showed. So that over that 40-week contract, that £75 a week does actually come out at the £3,000 for the year for the contract period. So and we've got around about 850 rooms at under £100 a week next year, so for the period 22-23, and that's about 20% of our bed stock. So we're kind of almost hitting that that kind of guidance that was presented, which hopefully is positive. But then we really do have that full range, and actually we still have accommodation on offer, you know, up through 99, 145 pounds a week there in the ensuite rooms, going up to 175 pounds in some of the new accommodation which is being built this year as part of a brand new 1,200 bed development, and then topping out at 215 pounds a week for 1-bedroom flats. So it's not necessarily that we're just trying to provide one price point or one specific set, but we're taking advantage of the variety that we have across the estate, and making sure there's lots of different price points at each different level.
So we have a number of guiding principles that we looked at. So a lot of this started, our affordability strategy actually started around about the time, so it's probably going back around about 6 years ago now, where we were looking to partner with somebody to provide 1,200 or circa 1,200 beds for us. And once we started doing that, we kind of worked with our students' union. We had an accommodation board, and students' union were part of that, to look at how we kind of put together an affordability strategy. And once we developed the strategy, we actually took it to finance committee, and it was signed off at finance committee. So it is kind of embedded into kind of our principles and how we take them forward. So I'll hand over to Martin, who's going to talk to you about ladder of rents.
Yeah, so we've already kind of mentioned there the ladder of rents, and it's interesting again looking at that information that Robin shared in terms of what goes into the student loan and grant profile, the ability for students to perhaps generate more money. In our next slide, we'll go into a little bit more detail on the specifics of how we've tried to develop a table that shows all of that information to then help us work through the percentage. I think adding to what Kirsty said, the paper that went to finance committee, was well received. And I think a real positive was that we were given, some future autonomy to be able to fix and set prices based on the principles, which has allowed us to look at demand-led pricing to flex and to actually this year or going into 22-23 acknowledge the increase that we're having in some fees through our new accommodation that's being built in partnership by actually having some deflationary pricing in the owned accommodation, and we've actually been able to reduce some of that to best provide that broad ladder, and make sure that we've got that high number of bed spaces, particularly under £100 a week and around that £3,000 a year figure.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that we looked at, and again, the Students' Union were really good in actually providing us information around students and budgeting. So certainly students, they have the restrictions of only being able to work 15 hours a week, but looking at the number of students who are actually working, so generating income for themselves as well, that falls into our guiding principles. And then we looked at other things. So one of the things at the time when we did these principles, there was a dig report which kind of looked at student spend, what they were spending with different supermarkets and volumes. That was 2018. So obviously we've had COVID since then, and I would imagine that the world is reset now. So we're looking at things slightly differently, particularly around being able to work. So throughout COVID, students were living in our accommodation, but there was no work. A lot of their work is in the hospitality sector, and that was closed down. So again, that's kind of driven us in terms of looking at the amount of properties we've got within that sort of first ladder of rents, and why we've had the deflation within there as well. Martin also does quite a lot of analysis on this, so I'll let him talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and the other point there is the local and national competitor analysis. So certainly in Leicester, something we've seen over the last probably kind of 5, certainly 7-10 years, a significant increase in the PBSA, lots of accommodation, being a university with being a city with 2 universities. Some of that has been weighted towards the other side of the city where De Montfort University doesn't necessarily have as much of its own accommodation, but we've certainly seen a great expansion, and being able to respond to that. One of the benefits of the setting up this guiding principles document, getting the sign off for finance committee, was an acknowledgement that we would need to consider what's happening locally and nationally to make sure we remain competitive, but also considering the development pipeline. What is the council approving locally, what other schemes are going to be coming online, and making sure that we're not kind of challenged constantly with making minor adjustments, but we've got the flexibility embedded within our governance process to be able to make those changes. And we do an annual analysis of both local and national, sometimes taking main surveys or national surveys, but also doing our own desk-based and kind of specific local, door-to-door research as well.
I think if we look at the cost and supply, the affordability measures, and Martin can talk us through how we put this table together.
So I think this is essentially kind of building on, I guess, what Robin has shared around just trying to put together a broad table looking at things like the maintenance grants. I appreciate and agree, there's no average, so it's using the best information and data available. So working with our colleagues in, the planning team, working with colleagues in student registry to understand what the kind of splits are between the students coming into the university and the type of grant that they might be eligible for, looking at our total bed stock, trying to then add in some specific information that we talked about around their potential to perhaps add more income through work, and then also consider the additional living costs that Kirsty mentioned we worked on with the Students' Union, and then trying to then stack against that what percentage of our bed stock we might have against different levels. This one is one from a couple of years ago, just an example, but it's something that we update on a regular basis to try and constantly reflect the changes, perhaps through our through the students that are coming through and the economic profile of the students coming into the university, but also our own bed stock, and that is what has helped us develop a more kind of consistent approach to affordability, and certainly, like I say, trying to deliver a better ladder of rent and more at that bottom end, because we've noticed again that there are people or students who require and don't that kind of cheaper accommodation, don't necessarily see as much of their loan based on the averages.
I think that follows on in terms of our engagement and governance. I'll let Martin tell you a little bit about what he does with the students and how he does that. But in terms of kind of our senior level engagement, everything that we do within the accommodation, Martin and I will work out where we're going to position rents using this affordability strategy and all the other sort of things that feed into that about the local market availability of properties, etc., what we're looking to nominate. All of that gets fed in, and then we have a strategic meeting with our Director of Finance and our Chief Operating Officer, and again all of that gets signed off and fed through into our budget planning round for next year. But most importantly is the work that we then do with the students. So prior to any of that sign off, I'll let Martin talk about what he does with our Students' Union.
So we present what we're looking and what we're thinking about to the Students' Union, so the president of the Students' Union and normally the chief executive officer or welfare officers, to understand what challenges they might have been faced with, whether that's specific student groups, which is something we'll talk about in a second, or just considering the broader challenges that students are facing in the market, and like whether we can potentially influence that, or at least provide an alternative which isn't somewhere else, and then build that into our broader ladder. So that might be about rebalancing our portfolio. So it might be about saying, well, where is there some, where have we seen larger demand, greater demand for perhaps some higher end accommodation that might have an element of increased price elasticity that we could then offset and provide some cheaper accommodation in a different area, or it might be about looking at the total package and understanding where we could perhaps add value, reduce other kind of hidden costs, which is something that the Student Union has been really kind of focused on at Leicester over a number of years, is not just those headline costs, but all those extras that students are asked to pay for, whether that's around transport or travel or kitting out rooms or anything like that. So that actually what we're doing is presenting an all-in-one, and that students don't find themselves challenged when they think they've been able to budget effectively, but actually there's these additional costs they weren't expecting. Obviously, a key part of what we try and do is supporting that transition away from home. There's an example on the screen of the kind of budget calculator, which we have again developed and worked with and looked to update, and that just allows students to plug in figures, to make sure that they're considering all of the different elements, not just the obvious things not just considering that weekly rent, but making sure they're taking into account all of the things they might need to consider, and make sure that they then reflect that in the type of contract that they're looking for. And the other thing to note is that we will also try and be as flexible as we can. I know perhaps other colleagues have been challenged with COVID and obviously capacity, and perhaps having capacity as well at clearing and voids. And one of the things that's been great in terms of the governance and having that affordability strategy written out and already approved is that we've had the flexibility kind of later in the recruitment cycle and the process to be able to look at where we perhaps aren't seeing the right demand, or we've perhaps not had the right product offered, and making adjustments to prices, whether that's to look at the weekly rent, whether that's to look at changing contract length to specific areas, or even maybe looking at some of those added value extra products that we can add on to make those packages more attractive or more affordable to students, and help fill and improve occupancy.
So then in terms of the specific focus, kind of an example of one of the things that Martin was talking about there is students, when we've engaged with our students, one of the things that they were really concerned about was additional costs in relation to buses. So we've got a city campus and a kind of a village campus, as it's called, which is 3 miles away from the main academic site. And we were charging for buses. Now, we did a piece of work with the Students' Union initially on affordability, where the bus pass was getting up to £400 a year for students, and it was just felt that was too much. So we bought the bus service in-house. So instead of it being a scheduled route, we just got that service and ran it privately, and reduced the cost down to £180, but it was still seen as an additional cost. So next year, what we've been able to do is just realign some budgets elsewhere, and we will include the bus within the actual cost. We've actually added a week onto our lets as well, which covers that price, as well as reducing some of our rents. So, for £75 a week, that also includes your bus transfer 6 days a week in and out of campus. I'll let Martin talk about some of the other specifics we've done in terms of contracts.
Yeah, we wanted to look at this in the round as well, and we've had some other opportunities to look at other kind of policies and to support different students with specific requirements. So adapted room policies, where we're matching kind of the average rate of a standard room, perhaps where a student requires a studio or a larger, more expensive room because of their specific requirements. We're then matching that back to an average for the room type that they would have had should it not have been for those specific needs for additional space or adaptations to the room. And that's been received really well, and we've worked really closely with the accessibility team to do that, again, to think about affordability beyond just kind of the standard package, but across the board for students with specific requirements. We've also worked really closely with colleagues who've supported the university becoming a university of sanctuary, and we've looked at where we can help students who are joining us with refugee status, again, pegging their rents back to an affordable amount that reflects the support that they receive, perhaps from governments or perhaps other funding sources that they have, but that we're not overstretching them, and that we're actually making sure that they get the benefit of having access to the great facilities and support that we offer in university managed accommodation, and that we can better help their kind of outcomes over the long run at the university without creating additional blocks or challenges in terms of price. Separately to that, that's developed into positive relationships with the Red Cross locally. And again, where we've had capacity, where we've had ability, it's been great to be able to offer some accommodation to non-students or to students who are connected to the university but might not be currently on courses, and doing short-term lets, which has then allowed them to either transition in to university or finding them somewhere locally with the Red Cross, and that's been a really positive kind of outcome of, I think, some of the changes that have happened through COVID. Obviously, we also supported key workers, like I know many universities did, and that helped develop that policy and program. And then looking at individual groups, and I mentioned before that we perhaps will look at specific areas of our accommodation through clearing that might be challenging, that might not be picking up as much in terms of demand in the moment. We also then have looked at that in terms of specific groups and our changing demographic. One of the big changes, obviously, during the last few years has been, certainly for us, the challenge in getting Chinese students, the Chinese PGT market actually in the country. That has been difficult, and that actually for Leicester has resulted in us taking a significant number of students from India, but actually we've noticed that their requirements are very different to those of their Chinese counterparts, and actually we've had to adapt packages to accommodate that. And we've done focus groups, we've done survey studies, we've really tried to work to understand what that package needs to look like, and we were able to react quite quickly last year within the principles to offer a different price and still maintain that overall kind of revenue and income target, but by readjusting the whole package in the ladder. And then the last piece on there is, again, talking to students as much as we can throughout the year, educating them on the different options, their housing choices. And we start that very early on. Again, that piece around trying to obviously not manage the market locally, but certainly give students enough information so that they make positive choices, the right choices, and make sure that they're looking at the best affordable options for them. And that's in conjunction with the Students' Union, but also SULETS, which is our independent student union letting agency, which is a charity run by both student unions. So lots of positive work that then helps us kind of round out that picture and feeds back into the conversations that we have each year at rent setting.
Just to kind of, again, just to extend one of those points that Martin made, one of the things that we really push at Open Days is trying to get students to understand that they can help themselves when it comes to affordability. There are a lot of affordable choices out there, but there is a big desire that we see with Open Day students that they need to come and have accommodation that has en suite, etc., and it needs to be of a certain standard. And what we try and do is educate them around the fact that actually there are more options out there, and perhaps if you did share a bathroom and you might only be sharing with one other person, that you could put yourselves 20 or 30 quid back in your pocket for the week. So it's trying to get them to look at things perhaps in a different light, which yes, helps us in terms of being able to sell that stock, but is truly around the affordability agenda as well for themselves, to give them options. So I think we've probably talked enough now. So, if there's any questions or whatever, very happy to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Martin. I thought it was fascinating. My brain was kind of going quite fast, trying to sort of keep up with your process there. I've got a couple of questions myself, but I think we'll come out first to the rest of the group and see a few hands up. So I think Stephen, I think you were first.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I agree that was a very interesting talk. Kirsty, you touched on it at the end, and I just wondered, in terms of your range of rooms, which were the most popular. Certainly at Manchester Met, we've got a range of prices, and there's probably a £50 a week gap in some of those prices, and over 42 weeks, that's over £2,000 a year. But our ensuite rooms, which are at the top end of that bracket, and certainly the newer ones, are the most popular, probably 4 or 5 times more popular on application still, even though we've got that range. And obviously in central Manchester, we've got, our rooms aren't as cheap as your cheapest rooms, but I'm talking ours are going from probably around 120 a week to 170. And we're just opened this year, and we've probably got a 4 or 5-fold increase in numbers for the higher end rooms and the lower end rooms. And we're at our cheapest rooms are the cheapest in Manchester. In fact, in every group that we've got, so be it ensuite rooms, be it standard rooms, be it sort of like Jack and Jill, sort of like townhouse rooms, we know we're the cheapest in the University of Manchester, a lot cheaper than the PBSAs. But what's your popularity like of the different groups?
So kind of at the start when we first opened, we opened in December for our returner market, and we've actually seen a difference this year to what we've seen in previous years. So there's no denying our most expensive rooms sell first. There is no denying of that. People like the studios, the one-bed flats, the premium ensuite, they are always the most popular. But what we've seen this year, because we've always had to balance our returner market because of demand. So we've always had to cap that. And we've put products in there that kind of mimic HMOs in some ways. So there's like a group of 5 of you could actually stay in one sort of self-contained flat. And that has proved popular to the returner market. So we are seeing more demand for standard accommodation, where bathroom ratios are lower, so sharing, you know, one between two, rather than all en suite, which is different. And again, these are low numbers because we're really targeting kind of returner markets at the moment. So that, you know, percentage wise, it's quite high, but the numbers themselves are lower. And I fully expect that we will sell out of all of our higher priced accommodation very, very quickly. And you know, some of it will have been gone before we even move into clearing.
Yeah, so mirrors what we've got, and that's our problem, I suppose. We're trying to maintain the more affordable rooms, but they're not as popular. And I know other universities where they've stopped doing it, they've closed those halls down, so they couldn't let them against where there's been a challenge in the market in terms of having PBSA with developers. You know, some places where there's been an oversupply, they've closed down their standard rooms, they can't sell them.
I think it's I've just got a thought on that. So I wanted to share that I wrote. I think it's interesting. I hear this quite a lot in different forums around, you know, it's always the expensive rooms that go first. And there is I mean, you know, bringing it back to kind of affordability and define, you know, it's about defining what's affordable. And if students can genuinely afford to pay for those expensive rooms and have enough money for all of their living costs as well, without having to work all hours God sends or get themselves into debt or bankrupt their parents, you know, then actually it's affordable for them. But then is there a proportion of students who think they want that expensive accommodation with the ensuite or the studio, but actually, you know, end up getting into arrears, end up, you know, putting undue pressure onto their parents to support them, having to take second jobs, you know, and having a negative impact on their sort of wider well-being and their academic performance, in order that they can just pay for this accommodation that they thought they wanted at the start, just because it looks great, you know, in the pictures. So my question is, I wonder whether Kirsty and Martin, whether your affordability strategy, having that affordability strategy, and part of that, something you talked about, is around communicating what comes out of that affordability strategy and engaging your students with it, so they go in with their eyes open, knowing whether they can afford it or can't afford it. You know, then actually they, you know, some students will then make more of an informed decision and potentially won't take the expensive stuff. Yeah. I don't know, it's just a thought.
Absolutely, and I think in answer as well to the previous question, what we've been able to do, and we've had the flexibility to do, partly because of the new development and obviously bringing on, you know, so many more bed spaces. It's been a good opportunity. I talked about a deflationary approach in some areas, is actually really challenging that lower end and that affordability and that kind of value proposition for the lower end accommodation. We did have, for one of our halls, for example, Lasden, a very low uptake, very low demand, but we at one point, you know, in the recent past, had it priced as high as £110 a week. It's now at £75 a week. So when I'm talking about price change, it's quite significant. It's quite drastic how we've been able to reprofile, and that has what has made the difference in terms of the demand for that lower end accommodation now. Now we're seeing early applications come through and demand picking up. So it might be about testing the kind of the product and making sure that you've got the value proposition right, and then making sure that it is actually, when you say the kind of the cheaper accommodation, it might be that actually it's still not the right value proposition for the product. And we've been able to do that. And it doesn't mean it'll stay where it is necessarily, because we've got to do this each year, but that at the moment that has seen an increase in demand and people seem interested in it.
I think that comes out of how, again, going back to having an affordability strategy to inform and to give you that sort of structure and framework to work within to be able to do that. Actually, yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think Lynn is next.
Yeah. Thank you, Robin. I'm from Newcastle University, so just a little bit of background before I potentially get to my question then. We, over the years, have really supplemented our ensuite accommodation. I know when I first came here, we had very little of that product, and that was what students wanted. So when we've changed our portfolio and built new and partnered up, we've always looked for those ensuite accommodation. And whilst a lot of students, like you've already said, aren't that interested in that expensive cost, it's something they feel they can do. I am very concerned that we've got to a point where we've got very little of our cheap product available now. So we have one residence that is under £100 a week, and that really has come about in the last 2 years, where when we've been doing our annual rent review, we felt we couldn't increase those rents. 2 years ago, we did a rent reduction. This year, we've put a 0% charge on that, so it isn't increasing because we really do want to keep it down. But even our other non-ensuite accommodation, which is, a ratio of 3 to 2 sharing a bathroom, even those are over that £100 mark. So I've been talking in the last few months about, well, here at Newcastle, we've got a lot of our accommodation that's in that £145, £150 region, where we're literally potentially going to lose one of our oldest accommodation blocks to make way for, again, new accommodation, which we have said at that point, we don't want it to just be all ensuite. We can't have it being at that higher price product. But I am concerned that there is a lot of students out there who will not be able to financially afford that. And we're looking at something that, can we bring in a product where we can look at, if students meet certain criteria, they can go into a more expensive product, but it's discounted. But really where I was wanting to get to with that is, can I ask, from Leicester's point of view, do you get any support from the main university, or are you, like us, a self-funded service within the university? So what we make as an income has to obviously pay for everything within our service. So as well as paying salary costs, putting in to be able to keep our stock refurbished and upgraded throughout the year, because in us saying that we don't get any support, we're also expected also to be a commercial service that brings in money to the university. And I quite often feel that we're stuck in this balancing scale as to, well, what's most important? Is it the income to the university, or is it the student experience?
So in answer to your question, Lynn, yes, we are self-funding, so we do have to generate our own revenue, and we budget to provide a lot of money back to the university, or a little money, depending on the university's position, what we're trying to do, and how much what we're trying to do aligns to what the university is trying to do strategically. We can bid for capital, so we can actually suggest that we're going to do refurbishments. I am trying different tactics, like we're divesting of some properties and they sit somewhere within the accommodation estate, so I'm trying to look at whether or not I can utilise that money for reinvestment. And then one of the other things that I have tried is retained earnings. We've also taken an equity stake in our accommodation that we're building, and I did manage to sneak into this affordability strategy that the money from that equity stake comes back into the accommodation account as well. So on all fronts, I'm always trying to protect our money, if you like, so generate it through commercial areas so that we can reinvest it. But the university is really kind of, we're strategically aligned to the university, so kind of their guiding principles are the same as ours. And fundamentally, if we need investment, I just have to make a really good argument as to why my investment is a priority over somebody in research or academia. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think Vicky, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. It was fairly similar to Lynn's actually, so you've probably answered it. I'm a bit of a noob in terms of the accommodation, and my background's in sport, both in universities and externally. And I've been in the role now overseeing accommodation for the last 18 months. So 12 months of that was a little bit mental and didn't really know what was going on, but still here. I sent a call out earlier in the week, and loads of people have got back already, which is fantastic, because we're looking to invest significantly. We've made the argument now that some of our accommodation is truly awful, but it's two really big blocks. We've taken out about 2,500 rooms over the next 3-4 years, but they're the most affordable. They're around, start just over £100 a week, so you're around the £4,000 a year. And they keep, I think, about 33% of our overall portfolio within kind of 27%, I think, of the student loan, so not quite the 25%. So my concern is we'll knock down the old crappy stuff and we'll build the new shiny stuff, but we're not going to be able to do that. We're starting to look now at some of these comments around more clusters sharing kitchens and not having ensuite, because I totally agree. I think the students think they want that, but if you're talking about affordability, you just can't build that, you know, particularly new. And we are looking at how we look to deflate some of the costs, because what's seen as kind of our mid-level at the moment, which are ensuite self-catered, people think they're new. They're not. They were built in the mid-80s, you know, they're really not new. But we're still charging probably, you know, not far off what you would charge for new. So we are looking at deflating those prices, because they would need to then start to look at our, you know, the affordability bit at the bottom. However, my issue, and this comes into the point that Lynn was making, we are part of the university, we're part of the Director for Student Experience. However, we're also expected to contribute, you know, quite a few million towards the university coffers, and I think that's causing a real problem. And I think, just to say, I meant to say thank you to Kirsty and to Martin, because being a noob, all of this is really, really useful, and you're doing some fantastic things there. And I know that if I suggested at Manchester doing some of these things, it all comes down to kind of, you know, cost. We, out of the money that we generate, we don't even get enough back to do the refurbishments that we need to. So I've inherited a bit of a mess, if I'm being honest. And I'm trying to figure out kind of the best strategy going forward. And I do think having, you know, being expected to contribute so much money back to the university is fundamentally the problem. And a few other colleagues that I've spoken to, you know, they think success is breaking even. So it's really interesting, Kirsty, hearing that, you know, you do contribute as well, but there's a balance somewhere in here. But that, I think that's going to be our biggest challenge, is how do we drive affordability for the students? And some of our students, you know, all our accommodation sells out. We've got 8,000 rooms. We don't have a problem selling the accommodation. And the students do, even the high end we sell, the low end we sell. So that there's not a driver either way to say they can't afford it or they don't want it. But yeah, that how you deflate and how you justify those decisions, I guess, in terms of that obviously means we're not contributing as much to the university, is the argument I'm going to have to make quite strongly, I think.
So Vicky, we were probably very similar to where you were, probably when Martin and I inherited the accommodation portfolio. Limited investment for a good number of years. We'd always added at the higher end. We hadn't really invested in anything else. And the project that we're doing now, we lost 750 of our cheapest rooms. They were, I think they were £89 a week or something. And we lost loads of those rooms to be able to make way for the project. But it came to a point with the accommodation where actually there was so limited, the investment had been so limited across the stock that it started to not sell. And that was the point at which you tend to get the ear of, you know, the people who can shape the purse a bit differently. I also changed my reporting line, so I started reporting to the Director of Finance, and I found that very useful to be able to kind of take them around, to give them an open day experience, which kind of gave them the good, the bad and the ugly, so that they could see what we were trying to sell. And it took a while to get people on board, but they did get on board. We were also in a position, though, for a long time where even though it was not great accommodation, we were full and we were kind of bursting at the seams and, you know, putting people in hotels. And that does tend to mask the problem. So my only advice I can give is maybe kind of if you've got a good relationship with the director of finance and your chief marketing operator, if they're the ones that are organising your open days, that's probably your route in to kind of getting on the radar for investment.
Could it also be as well, you know, just thinking, you know, bringing it back to affordability strategies, that actually having a defined affordability strategy like you guys do at Leicester, you know, with a strong rationale behind it, you know, then what you can charge for, well, you can put forward a case of what you can charge that is an affordable rent. So rather than thinking in terms of cheap and expensive, thinking sort of reframing it and thinking of it more in terms of affordability for the type of accommodation. And you know, that then can either show some accommodation as being, you know, just not viable anymore, and others, you know, viable for refurbishment based upon, you know, being able to charge X, Y, or Z as defined within your affordability strategy. So it kind of goes back to one of those points that I raised in one of my last slides around the benefits of having an affordability strategy. Actually, I'm really interested. I've only got 5 minutes left. Stephen, was that a new hand or was that a legacy hand?
The new hand, and it was
Yeah.
just to come in on the point, we've talked a bit about our own accommodation, but it was about the PBSA accommodation, which is, as you pointed out in your initial slides, was the most expensive accommodation. And it's what we can do, if we can do anything to try and stop that. And maybe if we could do something along the lines of what was, you said, the London scheme. I know Vicky and I both face that challenge in Manchester, which we've got very high rents. We've got some of the highest rents in the country. And in some levels, you can understand it when you've got land being sold at £20 million an acre, and then you've got to demolish what's on it and then rebuild it. So you can understand that the costs are going high. But I think we've just started negotiations now or consultation with the council around that sort of point. And I think something akin to what was said is fine. But I think we've got to be realistic. I think if you're saying that you're going to have new developers doing rooms, ensuite rooms at 3,353, they're not going to afford it. So it's about getting somewhere that we think is affordable, but realistic as well, and will allow them to develop the rooms. So certainly when we've been looking at doing supporting schemes in Manchester, at Manchester Met, we've been saying, right, you know, we will support you through planning potentially if you will provide us with a NOMS agreement for at least 20% of those rooms at 65% of the. So that's what we've worked on. It's still an affordable. We think it's a reasonably affordable rent, but it's something that's not going to. I think that's something that maybe as a group in Cuba we could look to do, and that some guidance so that when we've been, you know, in discussion with our planning authorities, we can say that then, and they can say we've got something. This is what Cuba recommends. Because I think that's where we've got to target as well, because it's not just our own halls; it's about what's going on around us. Because half the rooms that our students go into are PBSA halls. Yeah,
no, really good point, Stephen. I think, yeah, I mean, we're in a very similar position in Bournemouth. You know, we very much rely on the private sector. But again, it bringing it back to having a defined, you know, affordability strategy. As I say, you know, hopefully it is something that we're looking to work on here in Cuba to take this forward. I know we're getting very close to time now, and I see Ian's put his hand up, so I'm just going to hand over to Ian. You're on mute, Ian.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick one really, because I can identify with lots of things that have been discussed, but and we're experiencing a sort of demand for the better quality rooms, such that some of my affordable rooms, low price rooms now have been rejected when I'm offering them. I'm always trying to balance the number of those rooms relative to the demand, because that seems like an efficient way to work. But you know, we face all sorts of things going forward, zero carbon, you know, maintenance and building inflation, etc. Various other things that are going to factors that may drive rents up, inflation over time. One of the things I've started to think about, and I think it was highlighted in the affordability or the accommodation cost survey is, and I don't know if anybody else is doing it, but is anybody thinking about using bursaries instead of making the accommodation affordable by making the accommodation cheaper? Is anybody actually thinking about, sort of standardizing the costs that people pay for accommodation, perhaps, or more standardizing it, but using some of the income to actually provide bursaries to people to make it affordable for those that can be identified that need that accommodation?
That's kind of where we were coming from, Ian, with our initial plans, where we know students, as we say, if we're doing away with our cheaper product and we can't replace that in the Newcastle marketplace, because a lot of the new builds around there are en suites as well, that we were saying we were going to have to do something. Now, whether that was covered through a discount applied from accommodation, or whether we could get the central team to contribute to that, but that's one of my jobs for the next, certainly to go into 23-24, to be looking to see what can we do to support those students who quite literally will not be able to afford that £150 per week.
Yeah,
I think it's another tool within an affordability strategy that can be used, and I think some universities will have more access to bursary funds than others. Other universities, it will just be moving the deck chairs around on, the deck of the ship, moving fund, robbing Peter to pay Paul, is, you can be sort of going into that sort of realm, and just subsidizing expensive private sector rents potentially. You see where the government got with that, with housing benefits. So okay, we are actually at time now. I think a really interesting conversation. The one question I didn't ask was, is there anybody here today who has an affordability strategy as defined or similar to what Leicester have got? I mean, or do you think that as per the who's here in the group now, we kind of feel that Leicester's kind of got the most defined sort of framework in place? Do people agree with that? Yeah, I take silence as a yeah. So I think that's something obviously we can take away, and Kirsty, we can have a chat about that outside of this and decide sort of what we can do. We can come back to the group. So who's that? Someone's come in saying they've got a framework but not an affordability strategy. Who was that? Sorry, it's just JM213, unfortunately. Who is JM213? They're on mute and no camera.
Hi there, it's Joanne from Stirling, University of Stirling.
Oh, hi, Joanne.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we have a framework, and there was a lot of similarities with the University of Leicester, so I could really relate to a lot of what was going on there. I think we don't particularly budget an affordability strategy, but I'm just doing my new residency strategy, so I might wrap it up in that. But we have something like 48% of our stock meets the NUS affordability criteria, which is a big plus point with our students. We also have an enhancement fund for those people who even the lowest price might be too expensive, so that we can almost direct that funds, as somebody was saying there, to the people who need it the most, rather than just a blanket everybody benefits from us reducing rents or freezing rents. So okay. Yeah, we do have it. It's more of a framework than what we would call an affordability strategy. But as I say, we might just steal that now if that's.
So you think is that something perhaps potentially outside of this, Joanne? You might be able to sort of touch base and discuss in a bit more detail. Yeah. Okay, that would be fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so slightly over time, so I apologise, but hopefully worth just hanging on for an extra few minutes there, because I think really interesting conversation. This is just the start of this conversation. I think that here at Bournemouth, and I think across all the people who've attended today, I think we would all benefit from moving this forward, and Cubo taking the lead on this. So that's certainly something that we will be discussing outside, and we will come back to all the members on what the next steps will be on this. And Joanne, if you don't mind, we'll get in contact with yourself. Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Okay. Thank you all so much for your time. Hopefully that was useful, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons.